Hey, welcome to the show. Hey, it's my show. It's Mouth Breather's April Showers of Blood. And I'm your host. My name is Mouth Breather. We're doing a triple feature today, so that means we're going to watch 3 movies. Capiche? I thought so. That's right, we're going to do 3 very iconic films. 3 films that couldn't have much less to do with one another on the surface. Nonetheless, I think we have a very solid Sunday smorgasbord of some of the finest thrills and chills ever committed to celluloid. Let's move on. I could sit and jerk all these movies off all day, but I know that's not exactly why you're here, so I'll spare you. Our first movie takes us far away, both in time as well as geography. Geographically speaking, we're heading to the land of the rising sun, the land of Godzilla and Kurosawa, and Kazuo Koike and Goseki Kojima. Now, while those last 2 names aren't exactly household names here in the West, everybody in Japan knows about Koike and Kojima. Kazuo Koike was an extremely prolific creator. He was a successful lyricist, a novelist, and an entrepreneur, but he was most well known for his manga. Japanese comics. In particular, he was known for his seinen manga, which kind of loosely translates to young adult, but more specifically, young adult men. He had created Lady Snowblood and Crying Freeman, which were both very popular, and both of them adapted for the screen very quickly. Lady Snowblood ran from February 1972 until March of 73, and by December of 1973, the film was released. I only mention this to stress how important comics were in Japan at this point in time. Manga were as influential as movies to the popular culture. And Kazuo Koike was a bright star in that world. Seeing how many projects his name is attached to makes me question if that man ever took a nap in his entire life. Anyway, before Lady Snowblood was published, he had given Japan what would become his most influential work, the series that is the foundation which our first movie stands on, Kozure Okami, or Wolf Taking Along His Child, or as Western audiences know it, Lone Wolf and Cub. So I'm going to refer to it as such to make things easier on you and me. Lone Wolf and Cub ran from 1970 to 1976, 8,700 pages all told. That's right, it's a fucking behemoth of a story. It became an instant hit, selling 8 million copies. Japanese audiences responded to its very detailed and accurate portrayal of a particular period in their history, as well as the beautiful artwork of Goseki Kojima. Kojima had begun his life as an artist as a teenager. He made money selling advertising posters for movie theaters. He was heavily influenced by cinema, and if you look at any of his panels, that influence is blatantly clear. Lone Wolf and Cub would be the first of many collaborations between Koike and Kojima. They were so well respected in the industry that they became known as the Golden Duo. So now, as I'm sure you can imagine, with so much money being made selling comics, talks of both television and big screen adaptations of their series were soon had. Shintaro Katsu was one of Japan's most well-known entertainers. He was a singer and he could play multiple instruments. He was also an actor, best known for his role as Zatoichi in that long-running series. He had been acting in film since the mid-50s, so he existed within that old-school system of filmmaking where big names held contracts with big studios. Now, this essentially meant that the actors were obligated to do whatever project the studio gave them. Katsu fucking hated many of the movies he did while under contracts, and by the late 60s, ticket sales in Japan were declining, which created a market for smaller, more exploitative movies. So Katsu, who wanted to make a few more Zatoichi films, and just to give himself creative control over his career, formed his own production company, Katsu Productions. At some point, before the rights had even been acquired by anyone, he was asked if he would be interested in playing the lead role of Ogami Ito in a television movie. He felt that the source material would be better suited as a film. Now, he was working on 2 or 3 other projects at the time, so he knew he had no time to play the part, but he did turn around and secure the rights to Lone Wolf and Cub. He couldn't play the role, but he had someone in mind. Tomisaburo Wakayama had been a stage actor as a child. He'd given up the stage in his early 20s to pursue a career as a judo instructor, becoming a 4th dan black belt. He had become fairly well known as a martial arts expert by the mid-50s, so Toho, which is the biggest studio in Japan, found him and put him under contract as their new martial arts star in some Jirageki movies. Jirageki being period dramas, so in order to tell a historically accurate tale on screen, the studios needed skilled fighters. Wakayama was extremely disciplined, and he prepared for many of these roles by learning other styles like Kenpo, Iaido, Kendo, and Bojutsu. By the early 70s, Wakayama had been involved in over 200 projects for both film and television. He, like many other Japanese men his age, was a fan of Lone Wolf and Cub. So much so, in fact, that he tried to get the studio he was under contract with at the time, Toei, to secure the rights and put him in the leading role. Samurai movies weren't all that popular at the time, sort of like westerns over here. The major studios felt that they had kind of run their course and they were focusing their time and money and energy on Yakuza movies. When Wakayama heard that Katsu had bought the rights, he was a man on a mission. He knew he was a little overweight for the role. In the manga, Ogami Ito looks like a comic book hero. He is young and strong and fast. Wakayama, then in his early 40s, knew he had something to prove if he was going to secure the role that he had such a hard-on for. He felt like he needed the approval of the creator of the character, Kazuo Koike. In his mind, he believed this was of great importance, so he came up with a plan. A plan which consisted of him showing up unannounced at the home of Kazuo Koike. Of course, Koike was caught off guard when a man whom he had never met appeared at his door, looking as though he was ready to go into battle. Wakayama had brought with him a wooden sword. He introduced himself, and according to Koike, he said, "I really want this role, and if you think I'm too fat, watch this." Wakayama then proceeded to do all he could to dazzle Koike, putting on a very physically demanding display that consisted of swordplay as well as flips and somersaults right there in Koike's front yard. So Koike, who was probably very happy to discover that the stranger wasn't there to kill him, was so impressed by Wakayama's enthusiasm for the adaptation that he agreed to sign on as the screenwriter. This would be his first attempt at writing for the screen. Now, I think the most telling detail about this story is the fact that Katsu, whose production company would be making Lone Wolf and Cub, was Wakayama's little brother. Yeah, for whatever reason, they had both changed their names early in their careers, so there was never any doubt that Wakayama would get the part. It's all about who you know in show business, but he needed the creator's blessing. Because of that, the creator wanted to get involved. Having Koike's name attached to it would elevate the project. They had a pretty solid team going, now they just needed a skilled director. Kenji Misumi had been a staff director for Daiei Films since the mid-50s. Daiei was another one of Japan's biggest studios, and Misumi had been one of their most successful directors, mainly known for making Chanbara. Chanbara means sword fighting. Misumi was a veteran of the genre and the perfect choice to bring this saga to the screen. It would seem at this point as though everything would just sort of fall into place for this project. It didn't. So, for one thing, Wakayama was under contract with Toei Studios, and their executives didn't like the idea of one of their stars working for a rival studio. Fortunately, the president of Toei owed Shintaro Katsu a favor, so Katsu cashed in that favor to ask that they let his brother work on the film. Okay, so it seemed all of the business of making a movie was handled. Time to make this damn thing, right? Yes, but they had one little snag to deal with while they were finishing production and planning the film's premiere. Daiei, the company that had agreed to distribute Lone Wolf and Cub, declared bankruptcy. Now, they were basically working on an independent film with absolutely no way of knowing if they would find distribution once it was in the can. They did what they could to finish it quickly, while they still had access to locations and staff from Daiei's Kyoto studio facility. Now, for Misumi, the end of Daiei was devastating. They were one of the few studios that were still interested in samurai pictures. Misumi's pan to bata, bread and butter. Realizing he was working in a seemingly dying genre, he wanted to spice things up. You see, at this point, as many sword fights as there had been put on film in Japan by 1972, there really wasn't much blood. Kurosawa had made a few somewhat bloody films by this point, but nobody had used this much blood. This helped to keep it loyal to Kojima's cinematic concepts. I mean, what is a comic book but a well-detailed storyboard? Lone Wolf and Cub was released in Japan by Toho in January 1972. It did so well they made 6 of them. 4 of them would be released that year, and the last 2 the following year. Masumi would direct 4 of them. Okay, by this point I'm sure some of you are asking, why the fuck is this asshole who was supposed to be introducing Shogun Assassin spending all this time droning on about comic books and movies that aren't called Shogun Assassin? I'm getting there, I promise. Okay, so in August of '72, the first couple of Lone Wolf and Cub movies were released in the States. They didn't get wide release. Americans weren't all that interested in Japanese films yet. So they only played in bigger cities that had solid populations of Japanese people. David Weissman was a graphic artist, a protege of Andy Warhol. He had designed the poster for Fellini's 8.5 and co-directed a movie called Chow Manhattan. He got paid well. A world traveler and a lover of foreign films, he was a big fan of the Lone Wolf and Cub series. 8 years later, he would use the money he made from Chow Manhattan to secure the rights to the first 2 films in the series, Sword of Vengeance and Baby Cart at the River Styx. He and his partner, Robert Houston, gave Toho 50 grand for both movies. They appreciated the level of carnage and they knew it was marketable property. It could be a hit in the States. It was quite a gamble, but they were such fans, they set out to make it work. They knew they couldn't just release each movie as they had come. Those movies had already done poorly in the States. The second movie had more action in it, so they took about 12 minutes from the first film, Sword of Vengeance, and most of the second one, Baby Cart at the River Styx, and they more or less made a remix, not only splicing 2 movies into one, but writing all new dialogue and drastically changing the plot. They even hired deaf lip readers to create dialogue that would better sync up with the actors' mouths. The result isn't perfect, but better than most dubbed martial arts movies of the era. Houston and Weissman both do voices in the film, as well as a handful of other people. Most worthy of mention, mostly because it's just not a person you would expect to associate with a movie like this, is Sandra Bernhardt. Yeah, I believe this is her first credit, from what I understand. She agreed to do most of the female characters for $200 in hand. Also worth mentioning, the narrator is not part of the original films. So that is all written by Weissman and Houston. The narrator, Daigoro, was voiced by a kid named Jabron Evans. He happened to be the son of the guy who created the original artwork for the poster. For the most part, children's voices were done by women at this time. Weissman wanted the kid to sound like a kid. Either way, it pays off. The kid has the most dialogue in the entire movie, and he's the hook that drags you along for the ride. The more I think about it, the crazier it sounds that making a movie in this way could possibly even work. But it absolutely fucking does. As much as they changed things, they did so with nothing but respect for the material. While the plot is drastically distinct from the source, there is nothing lost in the way of character. As the creator of these particular characters was repeatedly quoted as saying, comics are carried by characters. If a character is well created, the comic becomes a hit. Except, he said it in Japanese and I didn't feel like trying that hard. But Weissman and Houston understood what they had. Sure, the brutality and gore and sensationalism of it all would have people talking, but none of that would work if the audience didn't care about the characters. Shogun Assassin was released to the grindhouse market in November of 1980 by Roger Corman's New World Pictures. It introduced American audiences who had recently begun to appreciate martial arts movies to a level of stylized violence they had previously not been exposed to. Its influence on American pop culture can be felt to this day. Fans of hip-hop will recognize sound bites from this movie from the GZA's 1995 album, Liquid Swords. It has been parodied in cartoons like Bob's Burgers and Rick and Morty. Shogun Assassin's influence even reached the hallowed halls of Disney with their extremely popular show, The Mandalorian. So every time you see Baby Yoda, you should think of little Daigoro and his dad, the greatest team in the history of mass slaughter. Alright, I've rambled on long enough. Let's watch this fucking movie. Here it is from 1980, Shogun Assassin. Have fun, kids.